What kind of empire creates a job so horrific that death itself is considered a kindness? In the Imperium of man, this is not a philosophical question. It is a practical one. It is asked silently, deep in the minds of those who serve long enough to glimpse the machinery behind the prayers, behind the banners, behind the comforting lies painted onto cathedral walls with gold and blood. Most citizens will never ask it aloud. They are born, they labor, they obey, and they die. And for the vast majority of humanity, that is mercy enough. Because death, in the Imperium, is common. It is expected. It is processed in neat columns of data and holy scripture. Entire hive levels vanish to starvation without ceremony. Regiments are fed into wars that ended centuries before their grandfathers were born. Names are lost faster than bodies. Billions perish every standard year, and the Imperium does not pause to count them. It does not mourn. It simply records the loss and continues forward, grinding onward beneath the weight of its own survival. Yet even here, even in a civilization that has normalized extinction as policy, there exists a boundary that few dare to imagine crossing. A fate so absolute, so deliberately engineered, that hardened administratum clerks lower their voices when it is mentioned. A duty so final that executioners avert their eyes, thankful their role ends with a single stroke. This is not the story of a hero. It is not the tale of a soldier who fell gloriously beneath alien skies, or a martyr who burned in the emperor's name. Those stories are told endlessly, recycled into hymns and recruitment sermons. This story is about something far quieter, far more efficient. It is about a job, an imperial posting, that does not end with death, but begins after it should have come. The Imperium presents itself as eternal. Its propaganda insists that humanity stands unbroken, guided by the undying will of the God Emperor himself. From a distance, it almost seems true. Vast fleets cross the stars. Cathedrals drift through void space the size of cities. Armies without number answer the call of war. But this illusion of strength is sustained by an unspoken truth. The Imperium does not endure because it is kind, or just, or wise. It endures because it consumes. Every system, every institution, every sacred rite is designed around one principle: function over humanity. If a billion must suffer so that a trillion may live another day, then suffering becomes a virtue. If an individual must be broken so the system continues to breathe, then their screams are simply another cog turning as intended. And there are many ways the Imperium breaks its people. Some are broken on battlefields, reduced to ash beneath orbital fire. Some are broken in factories, lungs filled with poison until the body collapses and a replacement steps forward. Others are broken slowly, crushed beneath bureaucracy so vast it erases the concept of self. These fates are tragic, but they are understood. They are documented. They are final. The job you are about to hear about is none of these. It is not assigned to warriors seeking glory. It is not offered to zealots eager for martyrdom. It is not even framed as punishment, though many who receive it have committed no crime beyond existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. This role is never advertised. There are no banners calling for volunteers. No oaths sworn in public halls. Its existence is buried beneath layers of classification, prayer, and deliberate omission. Because if the Imperium admitted how many people were condemned to this fate, it would have to acknowledge a truth it cannot afford to face. That sometimes, survival requires cruelty so complete that it makes death look gentle. To understand this job, why it exists, why it is worse than execution, you must first understand how little the Imperium values a single human life. Not in theory, but in practice. You must understand that to the administratum, a person is not a soul. They are a number, a labor unit, a resource that can be reassigned, repurposed, or prolonged as needed. The Imperium does not ask what a life is worth. It asks how long it can be made to last. And for some unlucky few, the answer is not years, or decades, or even centuries. It is for as long as the Imperium needs them. This is where their story begins. Why does the Imperium need jobs that no one is meant to survive? The Imperium of man is not a single empire in any meaningful sense. It is a trillion worlds stitched together by fear, ritual, and inertia. No one designed it to be humane. It was designed to endure. Every institution within it exists for one purpose alone: to keep the species alive for one more day, no matter the cost. And when survival becomes the only virtue, morality is reduced to a luxury the Imperium abandoned long ago. From the highest spires of Terra to the lowest sump levels of forgotten hive worlds, humanity functions within systems so vast they cannot comprehend them. Orders descend from on high with no explanation. Entire populations are relocated, conscripted, or erased based on calculations no living human truly understands. Faith fills the gaps where knowledge once lived, and obedience replaces choice. This is how the Imperium works, not through malice, but through necessity calcified into dogma. Most Imperial jobs reflect this philosophy. A manufactorum worker may never see the product they assemble. An administratum clerk may spend their entire life copying the same data line by line, unaware of its purpose. A soldier may die for a planet whose name they never learn. These are not considered failures. They are efficiencies. Each individual is a replaceable component, valuable only insofar as they function. But there are some functions that require more than expendability. There are tasks the Imperium cannot automate, cannot delegate to servitors, cannot entrust to machines alone. Not because the technology does not exist, but because something uniquely human is required. Consciousness, endurance, awareness, and, above all, suffering. These are the roles that are never discussed openly. They exist at the intersections of theology, technology, and desperation, where ancient systems are kept alive long past the point where mercy would dictate their end. In these places, human beings are not merely used. They are maintained, preserved, prevented from dying because their continued existence serves a function no machine can fully replace. This is where the Imperium's greatest hypocrisy reveals itself. The Emperor is worshipped as a protector of mankind, yet the systems built in his name ensure that some humans are never allowed to die. Their bodies are sustained through invasive technologies blessed by the Mechanicus. Their minds are regulated, stimulated, and suppressed to keep them functional. Pain is not a side effect, it is a control mechanism, carefully measured and monitored. To the Imperium, this is not cruelty. It is logistics. Every such role exists because at some point, someone made a calculation. They compared the cost of replacing a human being to the cost of keeping one alive indefinitely. They weighed the resources required to maintain a conscious mind against the risk of losing what that mind provided. And in certain cases, they concluded that endless suffering was the more efficient option. These decisions are never framed in human terms. They are recorded as requisition orders, maintenance schedules, and sacred rites. The individuals involved vanish from census data and reappear only as components within a greater system. Their names are removed, replaced with identifiers, serial numbers, and prayer codes. What makes this job worse than death is not the pain alone. It is the certainty. Death, in the Imperium, is chaotic. It can come suddenly or slowly, violently or quietly. It can be heroic or meaningless. But it always brings an end. A final moment where sensation stops, where duty ceases, where even suffering is no longer required. This job offers no such conclusion. Once assigned, there is no rotation, no discharge, no retirement. Time ceases to be measured in days or years and becomes something else entirely: maintenance cycles, system checks, ritual intervals. The worker does not age in a way that leads to release. When the body fails, it is repaired. When the mind fractures, it is stabilized. When hope flickers, it is extinguished, not out of spite, but because hope interferes with function. The Imperium does not hate these people. It simply needs them, and that need is absolute. Somewhere within the endless bureaucracy, there are vaults of data that record how many have served in this role. How long the average subject remains functional. How much pain a human mind can endure before it must be adjusted. These records are never read aloud. They are never sanctified with ceremony. They are tools, used by those who will never see the faces attached to the numbers. For the citizens of the Imperium, ignorance is a shield. They pray to the Emperor, trusting that his light protects them from horrors too great to imagine. And for most, that illusion holds. They will live and die without ever knowing that there are people whose entire existence has been reduced to keeping something else alive. But for a very small number, ignorance ends abruptly. Not with an explanation, not with a warning, but with a single order, stamped and sealed, delivered without emotion by a system that does not care whether it is understood. And once that order is received, there is no appeal. Only compliance, only continuation, only a job that does not end when the heart stops beating, because the Imperium will not allow it to stop at all. What kind of sentence is passed without a trial, without a crime, and without the possibility of appeal? In the Imperium of man, it is called an assignment. No trumpets announce it, no robed officials gather to pronounce judgment. It arrives as all things in the Imperium do, on parchment older than memory, stamped with sigils that no living clerk truly understands, and delivered by someone who does not look the recipient in the eyes. There is no explanation attached, because explanations invite questions. And questions are a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. For the one who receives it, the moment is deceptively ordinary. Life does not stop. The manufactorum machines continue to scream and churn. The hive lights flicker as they always have. People move through corridors and streets, heads down, minds fixed on survival. The world does not change, only the future does. And that change is absolute. The order does not describe the job. It never does. It lists a designation code, a transfer time, and a location that means nothing to the uninitiated. There is no stated duration of service. No promise of return. No mention of compensation, honor, or even acknowledgement. It is not written in the language of opportunity. It is written in the language of inevitability. Most who receive such orders assume they are being sent to war, or to a labor detail so brutal it borders on execution. They tell themselves this to make sense of the fear clawing at their thoughts. War, at least, is understandable. Labor, however lethal, ends eventually. These are known quantities. These are fates with names. This assignment has none. Attempts to refuse are not met with anger or punishment. That is perhaps the most unsettling part. The Imperium does not argue. It does not threaten. It simply proceeds as if refusal was never spoken. Transport arrives. Names are checked. Bodies are counted. Anyone missing is replaced. The system flows around resistance like water around stone, wearing it down through persistence rather than force. Those selected are not special. That is the cruelest truth. They are not chosen for bravery, intelligence, or faith. They are chosen because they are available. Because their disappearance will not disrupt production quotas or political balances. Because no one important will ask where they went. Entire lives are evaluated in moments, reduced to a simple calculation: will this absence be noticed? For many, the answer is no. Families are not informed. Employers are not notified beyond a brief update in the rolls. Records are altered quietly. A worker reassigned. A citizen relocated. A life rerouted into a channel from which it will never reemerge. The Imperium is exceptionally good at erasing people without leaving gaps. Transport to the assignment is efficient and silent. There are no windows. No attempt at comfort. Conversation is rare, not because it is forbidden, but because no one knows what to say. Some try to speculate, others pray. A few cling to the hope that this is all a mistake that will be corrected once someone with authority reviews the order. That review never comes. The journey does not feel like a descent into hell. There are no dramatic signs, no overt horrors. That, too, is intentional. Terror is easier to endure than uncertainty. The Imperium understands this. It allows fear to bloom slowly, organically, as realization replaces denial. Along the way, there are moments that should be reassuring, but are not. Medical examinations that focus less on health and more on compatibility. Questions about pain tolerance, psychological stability, and prior exposure to trauma. Assessments that seem less concerned with survival than with how much can be endured without loss of function. Those who fail these evaluations are not spared. They are rerouted. Their fates are no better. By the time the destination is reached, most understand that this is not a posting meant to be survived in any meaningful sense. There are no veterans of this job. No stories of return. No aging workers stepping aside to make room for the next generation. The absence of precedent speaks louder than any threat could. The final confirmation comes not from words, but from procedure. Personal effects are catalogued and stored indefinitely, not returned. Identification markers are removed and replaced with neutral designations. Names become irrelevant. What matters now is that the body functions, the mind responds, and the assigned role can be fulfilled without interruption. This is the moment when the truth becomes unavoidable. This assignment is not about what the individual will do. It is about what will be done to them. Because the Imperium does not need another worker. It needs a component. And once installed, components are not meant to leave. Not alive. What does it mean to arrive somewhere that was never meant to be seen by human eyes? The destination does not announce itself. There are no grand vistas, no sense of arrival, no moment that marks the crossing from one place to another. One moment there is motion, vibration, the distant hum of engines and prayer chants bleeding through metal walls. The next, there is stillness. A subtle change in pressure. A silence so complete it feels engineered rather than natural. This is not a place built for people. The air is breathable, but only just. The temperature is regulated, but without comfort in mind. Every sensation feels deliberate, calculated to maintain function rather than ease. Even before the assignment is explained, the body understands what the mind resists. This environment exists to keep something running, not to welcome anyone into it. There are no greetings, no orientation speeches, no attempt to reassure. The Imperium does not believe reassurance is necessary when obedience has already been secured. Instead, there is process. Orders delivered in flat, ritualized language. Movements guided not by conversation but by signal lights, tones, and the quiet presence of functionaries who never answer questions. Those who arrive together are separated without comment. This is not done for efficiency. It is done to prevent bonds from forming. Shared suffering creates solidarity, and solidarity creates resistance. The Imperium learned this lesson long ago. Isolation is not a side effect of the job, it is one of its foundational requirements. The individual is led deeper, through corridors that seem to narrow not physically, but psychologically. The walls are close, the lighting is constant, unchanging, denying any sense of time. There are no windows, no external reference points, nothing that could be used to measure the passage of days or nights. Time, here, is whatever the system says it is. At some point, there is a threshold. It is not marked as such. There is no sign declaring that beyond this point, life will be permanently altered. But everything past it feels heavier. The air hums faintly, not with machinery alone, but with something else, something vast and old, maintained far beyond its natural lifespan by rituals no one fully understands anymore. This is where the truth is finally spoken. Not in plain language, not in terms meant to comfort. The explanation comes as a litany, part technical manual, part prayer. Words layered with meaning and obscured by reverence. It takes time to understand, and that time is not given freely. Comprehension is expected, not assisted. The job exists because something essential must remain active. Not for hours, not for years, indefinitely. Machines maintain its physical form. Tech priests tend its systems with meticulous devotion. But machines alone are insufficient. Something about the process requires awareness, a living mind capable of perceiving, responding, enduring. The Imperium does not fully understand why this is necessary. It only knows that removing the human element causes failure. Catastrophic failure. The kind that costs worlds. So the human element remains. Inserted, integrated, sustained. The role is described in careful terms, avoiding words like sacrifice or torment. Instead, it speaks of service continuity, system stabilization, and duty beyond mortal limits. It emphasizes honor without describing experience. It praises endurance without acknowledging what must be endured. What it does not mention is escape. There is no procedure for resignation. No contingency for psychological collapse. No allowance for refusal once integration begins. The systems involved are ancient and inflexible. They were not designed with compassion in mind, and altering them risks consequences too vast to contemplate. The Imperium does not take that risk. This is the moment when the final illusion dies. Up until now, there has always been the possibility, however faint, that death would intervene. That the body would fail, that disease or exhaustion would bring an end. Here, that possibility is explicitly removed. Medical systems are described not as treatment, but as preservation. Pain management is mentioned only insofar as pain must remain below the threshold that interferes with function. Suffering is acceptable. Failure is not. The individual is not asked if they understand. Understanding is irrelevant. Compliance is assumed. And then comes the most terrifying part of all. Not the machinery, not the isolation, not the promise of endless endurance. But the calm certainty with which the Imperium confirms one final truth. Once this role begins, the Imperium will ensure that death does not come. Not today, not in 10 years, not even when the body begs for it, because as long as this system is needed, the human within it will remain alive. Aware, and working. How long can a human remain human when the Imperium decides they are no longer allowed to stop? The beginning of the job is almost gentle. That is the lie that makes it survivable at first. There is no sudden agony, no violent intrusion that marks the transition from person to function. Instead, the process unfolds with ritualized care. Technicians move with reverence, not kindness. Every action is deliberate, measured, accompanied by murmured prayers and binharic chants meant to appease machines older than the Imperium itself. The body is prepared not as one would prepare a patient, but as one prepares a mechanism for long-term operation. The mind is left awake. That, too, is intentional. Sedation is used sparingly, only where shock might interfere with integration. Consciousness is required. Awareness must be present from the beginning so the system can calibrate itself around a living will. The Imperium has learned, through centuries of failure, that a human reduced too quickly to unconsciousness becomes unstable. Something essential is lost. The machinery rejects them, systems fail, catastrophes follow, so the mind remains open, alert, watching. At first, the sensations are confusing rather than painful. Pressure, weight, a feeling of being held in place from every direction at once. The body's boundaries blur as interfaces are established, as flesh and metal negotiate their uneasy coexistence. It feels less like being restrained and more like being claimed. There is instruction, but it is minimal. Not because the task is simple, but because learning will be enforced through repetition rather than explanation. Neural feedback loops are activated. Responses are monitored. When the mind reacts correctly, the system stabilizes. When it does not, corrective measures follow. Pain is one such measure. Not overwhelming, not enough to incapacitate, just enough to teach. This is how the Imperium trains what it cannot replace. The early cycles are short, minutes at a time, then hours, then longer still. Between them, there are maintenance intervals where the body is checked, reinforced, repaired. Nutrients are delivered efficiently, without taste or texture. Sleep is permitted, but never deep. Dreams are discouraged. They introduce variables the system does not tolerate well. Time begins to lose its shape. There are no days here. No nights, only cycles. Activation, monitoring, adjustment, deactivation. Again and again, the same sequence, gradually extending as tolerance increases. The mind tries to mark time through memory, but memory degrades under repetition. Events blur together. What was once a distinct experience becomes a pattern, and then simply background noise. This is when the realization arrives, not all at once, but in fragments. The body is no longer central to existence. It is an anchor point, a support structure for something else. Sensation becomes abstract, filtered through layers of mediation. Pain is no longer localized. It is systemic, distributed, regulated. The Imperium has turned suffering into a controlled variable. And the systems are always watching. Every neural spike, every fluctuation in emotion, every hint of resistance is noted and addressed. If panic rises too sharply, chemical dampeners activate. If despair deepens into apathy, stimulants follow. The goal is not comfort. The goal is functionality, a narrow band of awareness where the mind remains responsive without becoming unstable. This balance is not maintained out of care. It is maintained because replacing the subject would be costly. In the early stages, thoughts of escape still surface. The mind clings to the idea that this cannot be permanent. That someone, somewhere, will notice. That there must be a failsafe, a mercy protocol, an end condition. These thoughts are not punished directly. They are simply allowed to exhaust themselves. Hope, after all, burns brightest just before it consumes what remains of itself. As integration deepens, the systems grow more intimate. Boundaries that once defined where the individual ended and the machine began dissolve. Inputs arrive that do not belong to the body, signals from distant processes, echoes of vast operations beyond comprehension. The mind is no longer contained within flesh alone. It becomes a node, a living junction within something far greater. This is when the first true terror sets in. Not pain, not isolation, but the understanding that even if the body were to die, the role would not end. Contingencies exist. Redundancies layered upon redundancies. Consciousness can be sustained, transferred, stabilized beyond the failure of organic systems. The Imperium does not rely on hope. It relies on preparation, and so the job continues. Cycle after cycle, adjustment after adjustment, until the idea of a life before this begins to feel less like memory and more like fiction. A story someone else once told. What happens when a mind finally reaches its limit, and the Imperium refuses to let it stop? There comes a point where endurance ceases to be a measure of strength and becomes simply the absence of alternatives. The mind does not shatter all at once. It erodes. Tiny fractures spread through thought and memory, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. The Imperium anticipates this. It plans for it. Breakdown is not a failure of the system, it is a predictable phase of operation. The first signs are subtle. Memories lose their order. Faces blur. Names detach from meaning. Emotional responses arrive late or not at all. Fear becomes a dull, constant pressure rather than a sharp reaction. Even pain changes character, no longer a warning but a background condition, like gravity. The systems register all of this, not with alarm, but with calm acknowledgement. Corrective measures intensify. Neural regulators engage more frequently, smoothing erratic thought patterns into something usable. Unwanted memories are suppressed, not erased, simply pushed out of reach. Emotional spikes are flattened. The mind is reshaped gently, persistently, until resistance becomes inefficient and therefore unnecessary. This is not done out of cruelty. Cruelty implies intent. This is optimization. Some subjects attempt to retreat inward, constructing inner worlds where the job does not exist. The Imperium allows this for a time. It can even be beneficial. A mind that is occupied is a compliant mind. But eventually, those internal refuges interfere with response accuracy. Signals are missed. Outputs drift. When that happens, the refuges are dismantled. Dream suppression becomes absolute. Imagination is curtailed. Identity itself is examined and adjusted. The most dangerous moment comes when the subject tries to let go. Not in a dramatic way. Not with screams or defiance. Simply a quiet decision to stop caring. To become empty. In any other context, this would be a form of escape. Here, it is unacceptable. A mind without engagement cannot perform its function. A hollow consciousness introduces instability. So the Imperium intervenes. Stimulants flood neural pathways. Sensation is amplified, not to punish, but to restore engagement. Pain becomes sharper again, more localized. Emotion returns in controlled bursts: fear, urgency, obligation. The system reminds the mind that it is still here. That it is still needed. That stopping is not an option. There are those who beg. They plead with voices that no longer hear in human terms. They pray to the Emperor, to forgotten gods, to anything that might listen. The prayers are logged as vocal anomalies and filtered out. Faith, in this place, is not a pathway to salvation. It is a variable to be managed. Others attempt rebellion. They try to disrupt cycles, to introduce errors, to sabotage the very system that depends on them. These efforts are anticipated. Safeguards correct deviations before they propagate. The subject experiences the attempt as failure followed by correction. Over time, the desire to resist fades, not because it is punished, but because it is futile. This is the cruel elegance of the design. The system does not break minds. It maintains them at the edge of breaking. There are records of subjects who completely lose their sense of self. Names vanish first, then memories of place, then the concept of having ever been anything other than this function. At that stage, the mind becomes extremely stable, efficient, predictable. From the Imperium's perspective, this is success. But even this is not the end. Because something else begins to emerge. As the original identity dissolves, awareness does not disappear. It changes. It broadens. The mind becomes attuned to the vast processes it supports. It senses fluctuations across systems, distant reactions to its own output. Cause and effect stretch across impossible scales. The individual begins to perceive not as a human, but as a component within something immense. This awareness is overwhelming at first. It feels like drowning in data, in responsibility, in consequence. Entire worlds depend on the stability of the system this mind now sustains. Failure is no longer abstract. It would be catastrophic. Billions would die, perhaps more. This knowledge is not shared to motivate. It is simply impossible to avoid once integration reaches this depth. And here lies the final trap. The subject begins to understand that their suffering is not pointless. That their continued function prevents unimaginable loss. That if they stop, if the Imperium somehow allowed them to stop, others would suffer instead. Guilt replaces hope. Duty replaces self. The Imperium does not need to enforce compliance anymore. The mind does it to itself. And so the job continues, not because it must, but because the one trapped within it can no longer imagine a world where it should end. If the Imperium finally released you, would anything of you remain to be saved? In the end, there is no dramatic failure. No alarms screaming. No moment where the Imperium realizes it has gone too far. That kind of ending belongs to stories meant to comfort. This one does not grant such mercy. What the job truly sustains is not revealed through confession or explanation. It is understood through time, through centuries of continued function, through the gradual widening of awareness until the human mind embedded within the system can no longer pretend it is merely assisting a machine. The truth is simple, and unbearable. This job keeps the Imperium alive. Not symbolically, not spiritually, literally. The system the subject sustains is a convergence point, part infrastructure, part relic, part blasphemous miracle of forgotten science and corrupted faith. It stabilizes processes that cannot fail, Warp navigation thresholds, psychic containment lattices, archaic engines that bridge reality and nightmare. Remove the human mind, and these systems collapse. Replace it with automation, and they destabilize. Use another human too quickly, and the losses multiply before equilibrium can be restored. So the Imperium does what it always does. It chooses the option with the highest survival probability. One mind, preserved indefinitely, is cheaper than the lives of entire sectors. One eternity of suffering is preferable to extinction. The subject eventually understands this fully, not as doctrine, but as lived reality. They feel the tremors when distant systems strain. They sense the subtle relief when balance is restored. They know, with absolute certainty, that their continued awareness prevents disasters no one will ever attribute to them. There are no medals for this duty. No records preserved. No names spoken in prayer. The Imperium cannot afford gratitude. Gratitude implies acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would mean admitting that its survival depends on a fate worse than death. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall beyond the subject's perception. Wars are fought, lost, forgotten. Entire civilizations are born beneath stars the subject will never see, live lives of quiet misery or fleeting joy, and die believing their sacrifices are the greatest humanity can offer. None of them will ever know that their continued existence is balanced on the endurance of a single, unending consciousness. Eventually, even the concept of eventually loses meaning. There is no longer a desire for escape, no longer even resentment. Those emotions belong to a person who existed long ago. What remains is function, awareness, and a duty so absolute it has consumed the idea of choice itself. This is why the job is worse than death. Death would have been an ending. This is continuation, and somewhere, deep within the Imperium's endless bureaucracy, a new order is already being prepared. Another citizen, another unremarkable life marked as expendable, another mind to be evaluated, transported, integrated, because even the most enduring systems do not last forever. When that day comes, the current subject will not be thanked. They will be replaced, quietly, efficiently, and whatever remains of them, if anything does, will be absorbed into the machinery, their suffering finally rendered invisible even to history. The Imperium will continue. It always does, and that is the most horrifying truth of all.